Welcome to Tanakh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live out of Kingsland, Texas, USA, with episode number 67. The Old Testament God versus the God, the God of the New Testament, with Rabbi Tobias Singer from Jakarta, Indonesia. Rabbi, shalom, shalom. Good to see you again. There's so many words in that title, I wasn't sure how to actually hit it with the biggest pop.
First of all, let me just a little advice.
Yes.
You don't really, airtime is very valuable. You don't need to tell people from Jakarta. They take one look at me, they know right away I'm from Indonesia. I mean, this is like, in the dictionary, under the word Indonesian, there's a picture of me. So they don't need this. This is redundant. This is superfluous. It's unnecessary.
That's
Time
funny.
is tight. Life is short. Let's move on.
That's cute. Hey, last little module you made with the what was his Wyatt Earp? What's the guy's name? John
Wyatt Earp.
Well, you know the John Wyatt or Ron White. Ron White. That's it. With the Dead Sea and all the findings and stuff. I was just watching your little module that you created from that. By the way, I get people all the time ask me, what is the song that is played at the end of all these little mini modules? I'm like, you know what? You're gonna have to email Rabbi Singer on that because that's his creation. So
it's not. It is copyright free. So anyone can email me at tobiasinger1@aol.com, and it's copyright free, and I'll be glad to send you the MP3 and enjoy it. It's
beautiful music. It really is.
Of course, thank you. I'm kidding. I didn't do it. But it was.
It's like, hey, you're a good cook here. Yes. That's funny. Okay, cool. Well, it's been a great week. I'm going to log on right now. I have to log in like after the intro because otherwise the phone will be ringing like during the introduction. So
is that what happens?
Yeah, it does. Okay, so actually there's a gentleman going to be calling. He called earlier about 10:15 and he requested to be able to call back. Did I pause this music? No, hang on one second. He requested a call back rather than leaving his name and information here. So, so no, I was thinking, you never know what that's going to be like whenever somebody says, "Nah, let me call in, man."
Yeah, okay. I don't know.
And that may be the guy right there. So let's go ahead and answer this right here.
Welcome, David.
And so, welcome to the show. We are now going live with today's official broadcast of The Angry God. We're going to find out what it's all about. But for now, let's take this call. Caller, thank you for tuning in. Tell us your name, where you're calling from.
My name is Joel from Brooklyn.
Joel from Brooklyn, how are you? If I can get my pen to write.
I'd like to ask a question for Rabbi Singer.
Okay, sure, go right ahead.
Yeah, I'll get another Singer. Is it true that the earlier followers still kept the Torah mitzvahs, and then Peter was placed in like a Chumam to portray religion and to divide them from the Jewish nation?
If you would just say that a little slower, and
I didn't hear it either, actually.
No. If he says it, he's speaking a little Yiddish in yeshiva, which I love, but just say a little slow for me.
Got it.
Is it true that the earlier followers still kept everything Torah mitzvahs, and then the Chachomim, the Pharisees, put in Peter to divide them from the other Jews?
Oh, okay.
And to make the Shabbat on Sunday and everything like that.
Okay.
Gotcha.
That's a very good question.
Yeah, that's really cool. Okay, perfect. Joel, thank you for calling in. Go ahead and let's hang up now, and you can tune in for the answer, okay?
All right.
Yaeli,
thank you for calling in. All right. That is an interesting question.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Because that's actually, I won't add to that because there's so many spin-offs on that thing. It's crazy. So,
plus, if you add to it, you ruin the whole show. So that's it. You're just a pretty face.
Isn't that obvious? No. You got the pretty face part actually is what you're missing. So let's. That's the one thing that is. Actually, you're the pretty face for the show. We all know that. Okay. All right, Rabbi, take it away.
All right. So I'm gonna. Two questions were asked, and they were sort of conflated into one. Let me explain them. The first question was, can we say that the earliest Christians, and again, please don't send me 5 emails that they weren't Christians, they were Messianics, all that. We need to use conventional language so that we can have a conversation. So we're just going to call everybody who believed in Jesus Christians, and those who didn't, we're going to call them intelligent. I'm kidding. I was joking. Okay, I'm sorry. That was Jewish humor, and it's fine. Everyone in Brooklyn's going, he's number one. Let me explain here what's going on.
Okay.
So, is it true that the earliest Christians, almost certainly true, that the earliest Christians were people who kept the entire Torah? And the answer, that they were Torah observant, the answer is absolutely. Not only that, they were, and we could see it even inside the Christian Bible, in the Christian text, in the Greek Bible, that they were Pharisaic. And they came from the Pharisaic world, and they were completely Torah observant, so much so that there was a major war, and I won't go through it too much because it's not directly germane to your question, but there was a major fight that went on of whether non-Jews, not even Jews, as we say in Yiddish, is upgeret, meaning Jews who had converted to Christianity, became Christians. They certainly had to keep the mitzvahs. The question was, do Gentiles who want to become, meaning non-Jews, do they have to keep the Torah, they have to keep the mitzvahs as well? And this leads to the first Christian ecumenical council in Acts chapter 15. And there it is established that essentially non-Jews who accept the Christian religion only have to keep essentially, these are not the words, but if you look at it, keep the 7 Noahide laws. They don't have to keep other commandments, Sabbath, and so on and so forth. They certainly don't have to become circumcised, but they're not allowed to worship idols. They're not allowed to eat the flesh, the meat that was given, offered, sacrificed to an idol. Paul will abrogate that in his letter to Corinth in 1 Corinthians 8, where he changes it. That means he disagrees with Acts. Of course, he wrote earlier in Acts. There's a very big question among scholars if of the author of Luke ever read the letters of Paul. There's many questions here, but it's not germane to this show. But the key is Paul actually, when asked the question, can we Christians eat from the flesh offered to idols? He says, of course you can. If you know the idol is nothing, so it's nothing, go ahead and eat it. So Paul actually disagrees with that. But the earliest Christians that we know about are groups that, like Nazarenes, Ebionites. These are people that were certainly Torah observant. How do we know? How can I know that? How do I make statements without... Well, the answer to that question, and to make that question even more difficult, of how can I make such a claim? It's a very strong claim. So to begin with, the opponents of Paul, because Paul is fighting with them on every page, their writings did not survive. The writings of the Ebionites, as the writings of the Nazarenes, those who lost the battle, and that this group of Torah observant Christians, so no one copied their writings. And the only writings that were copied, remember, it's not a printing press, so copy means a lot of work, but only those that were adopted as the orthodoxy. Paul won, and therefore it means his theology, his Christology was accepted and became the prevailing constitution of Christian theology and doctrine, and therefore to the victor goes the spoils, to the victor goes the books. But we know with certainty that these Christians were teaching, who Paul is opposing in every one of his letters. Paul's opponents largely are not Jews who are not Christians. They're other fellow Christians who have a different Christology, who believed that Paul was a fraud, a Johnny-come-lately, and Paul is opposing them and saying, no, you don't have to keep the law, and if you think that you can get circumcised and that will save you, Galatians 5 and 6, that's an authentic Pauline letter, then Christ will avail you nothing. This is very clear. So we know with certainty that the earliest Christians were Torah observant, but eventually Paul won the day. So that's the answer to that question. And there's much more there, but we'll just end it there, because then comes the intriguing question. So there is a tradition. That this is going to flip people out. So I just want to just start off with I don't want to get emails, and don't write 500 things on the YouTube, you're an idiot, so on. It's a legend, okay? So I'm saying that at the outset, full disclosure, but it's a strong legend. And the legend goes exactly like this, that because of the very earliest Christians, bear in mind, the oldest Christian writing that survives is Paul, is 1 Thessalonians, around 49. We have nothing between 30, we have nothing prior to 49. We have texts in the Christian Bible that some scholars say are pre-literary texts. You'll learn about this if you took courses like in hymns and creeds. So that's where you learn about this stuff, but that's all very speculative. We really don't have anything prior to 49. Nothing survived. Were the writings that existed? It's questionable. But again, I don't want to go off course. There is a very strong, it's a legend, okay? And many Jews do not believe this. I want to make this very clear, but it's a very strong legend. And the legend goes as follows. And that is that the Jewish people were confronted with a serious problem with this heretical group. They didn't believe in the Trinity. They didn't believe in the virgin birth of Jesus. That is a much later invention. By the way, we know this also from the church fathers. Most importantly, Eusebius talks about them, and other patristic writings discuss the Ebionite group. They didn't believe that Jesus was born of a virgin. They believed all that stuff came lately, was interpolated into the book of Matthew, which the Ebionites liked, but they believed the infancy narrative was a later Christian invention. But the key point is that these were Jews who were largely almost indistinguishable from other religious Jews, meaning they went to synagogue, they prayed, they kept Shabbat, they kept the commandments, and so on and so forth, which became a very serious problem, according to this legend, in that it was more dangerous that we have this heresy in the synagogue, and therefore it can metastasize. And therefore it was vital to the sages that this heresy would be like what Mormonism is to the church, or what the charismatic movement would be to a cessationist, to a Southern Baptist. They would go, that's a little heretical there, because that's the difference back then. It wasn't like, wow, all that stuff, the Trinity and so on. That we have to get this out of the synagogue. We have to get this Christianity thing out of the synagogue. And those people who are going to follow Jesus, they should not be inside the synagogue. One other caveat that should be mentioned, and this is widely accepted among virtually all Christian scholars, and that is by the time we get to about 50, almost all the converts to Christianity are now Gentile. Once we get into the 50s, it's already not Jews. Certainly, it's now a tremendous influx of non-Jews. Why would non-Jews be interested in this young, fledgling Christian sect? That is beyond the scope of this broadcast, but there's a consensus that this is correct. Every reason to believe this is right, and right now accept it. Now, so this becomes a problem, and the sages wanted the Christian sect out of the synagogue. They didn't wish them dead. They just simply wanted it to be away. Okay, and a man named Shimon, or Peter. Peter is really the Aramaic name, Petros, meaning the rock. But his name really would be Shimon. He was summoned, he was a great man, and he was summoned to move this fledgling movement out of Jerusalem into Rome, not literally but figuratively, to move it out, because it was very, very dangerous within the Jewish community. He was very reluctant to engage in such an endeavor, meaning to say that now we don't have to keep the law and so on. And that transition of Peter can be easily seen in the book of Acts. In fact, the first non-Jew, we are told in the book of Acts, who's converted to Christianity is converted by Peter, who we usually associate with someone who would be an evangelizer of Jews. Peter, Shimon, this Jew, a righteous Jew, not a Christian, asked, well, how do I know if I do such a thing? That means I have to infiltrate the Christian community to move it out of the mainstream Jewish community. Might I lose my place in the world to come? And this was a genuine fear. At the time, there was a great rabbi, his name was Shmuel HaKotten. He was a giant of an individual, and he was a sage who had Ruach HaKodesh, who had divine inspiration, and he was a great miracle worker. He also wrote one of the V'leman Hashinim, one of the 19th benediction in the silent prayer known as the Shemona Esrei. And this great rabbi assured Shimon that if he will undertake this very noble task, that he is assured a place in the world to come. Now, it gets so that's the legend, okay? So there's the legend. And Peter successfully moved Christianity out of the synagogue and into the church. That's the key point. Again, legend, but a very, very, very well-known legend. And it's widely known throughout the Jewish world, from the east to the west. Now, I, for many, many years, just thought, okay, it's a legend. What difference does it make? It doesn't make a difference if it's true or not true. It doesn't. If it happened, didn't happen. Bear in mind, incidentally, we have no contemporaneous literature written by non-Christians during the first century. We have nothing. So all we have is Christian texts, which are, well, as John concedes, all this meaning this gospel was written so that you might believe. That was the purpose of writing it. This wasn't the Wall Street Journal. This was written for the purpose. It was to advocate Christianity. I remember it was a Simchas Torah. It's a holiday on the Jewish calendar at the end of Sukkot. And I was dancing with the Torah, which Jews do. But I was dancing so much that I became very tired after a lot of dancing with the Torah late at night. And I was in a synagogue. It was really a Beis HaMedrash, a place of study. And I took out a Shulchan Aruch, which is the codified Jewish law. And I started studying. I just sat down and just started studying. And there's an area called Hilchos Tainus, means the laws of fast. And as it turns out, there are a handful of major fasts which every Jew keeps. But then there are these minor fasts that most Jews don't keep, and most Jews do not even know about. But they're there, and very, very pious Jews keep them. And it goes through each of this one, for example, on the day that the Septuagint was written. There's a fast day. It's a minor fast day. And we can see today why. And then there's one fast this is the last law of the laws of fast. The last one is that there's a fast day in Teves, and the law, and it says that, and we don't know the reason why this is a fast. We don't know the reason why we fast on this day, which is a very strange thing. That screams of censorship, self-censorship. I then went to the back of the Shulchan Aruch, where you have all the commentaries, and there's one commentator, Rav Levovich, and he writes there these words. That's all I'll say. He said, I saw it with my own eyes. I don't know what it is, that this is referring to. This date is the yahrzeit, meaning the date of death of Shimon, of Simon, of Peter, who infiltrated the church, and he died, and therefore we fast on this day that in his memory that he passed away. So this is a legend. I did find a source for it. It's not, I'm not saying I believe it, you have to, you don't have to believe it, but that answers the question. It's a very well-known legend, but it is not, we don't have extensive writings on it.
So what you said a minute ago about not having any first century writings, you're talking about extra outside of the New Testament. That the New Testament,
that means there are no non-Christian writings during the first century, and what we find in Josephus is not contemporaneous. Josephus was born in 37. That's the year. That's after Jesus was born. And the text that we find famously in Antiquities 18 is a later invention, interpolation. The first text that we have written by a non-Christian that is unassailable is the text by Pliny the Younger in 112. We have nothing. We have zero outside of the Christian Bible. But we can be sure of this. When you're reading Paul's letters, and he is fighting with Peter in Galatians, he's fighting with fellow Christians. He is screaming at the churches he put together in Asia Minor, in the book of Galatians. There's no way that was made up. No one would invent something so embarrassing. So we could see from Paul constantly saying that I am the true apostle. I don't get my information from apostles and others. I receive everything directly from Jesus Christ. He's pushing back. What is he pushing back at? He's pushing back at the assertion that he is not a true disciple. He is a fraud. He's a fake. He never met Jesus. And his Christology is, in fact, fatuous. And that's what Paul is constantly pushing back against. We know what he's pushing against. He's pushing against those early Christians who say, you do have to keep the commandments. What is Jesus's death? What does Christianity have to do with abrogating the commandments of the Torah? Absolutely nothing.
Interestingly enough, unbelievable. And not to mention that most of the church, they developed their entire theology. I'll say entire. Well, if they knew this, they would say, well, we don't buy that part of Paul. But Paul, like you said before on many occasions, Paul never once said anything about a virgin birth. And that's really one of the main fundamental beliefs of the Christian church is a virgin birth. So.
Well, the virgin birth is a later development in the church. That's why it won't show up in the letters of Paul. It's not going to appear in the book of Mark. It will find its way into Matthew and Luke, and the infancy narratives, which are the only two that we have anywhere in the Christian Bible, each use not only a different but a contradictory plot device in order to have Jesus born in Bethlehem. And I touch on this in my book in volume 1, where I go through this extensively.
Very good. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on to this next caller. Caller, welcome to the show. Please tell us your name and where you're calling from. And for all you viewers out there, when you call in, you'll be placed on hold, but you'll be able to hear us talk. Right now, there's a 20, 30-second delay, so if this person is actually watching the screen, they're not going to know I answered yet. So, all right, so basically, another question we're going to get into in a little while, Rabbi, talks about, does the Quran say that the Jews are the most hostile towards Islam and Christians are the kindest? There's one point there. And then also, actually, caller, can you hear us yet? Are you watching? Oh, you know what's really funny? I can't think of everything. I should be able to. You'd think a year and a half later I'd know to turn up the volume on the phone call. Caller, I'm sorry. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from.
Hi, my name is Shlomi. I'm calling from New Jersey.
Okay, sorry about that. That was my fault. Okay, very good. So you're calling from New Jersey. Welcome to the show. What's a question for the Rabbi?
Yeah, first I was the one that called before. The reason I wanted to call back live is because I wanted to have the opportunity also to thank you and Rabbi Singer for you do.
Oh, perfect. Oh, you called around 10:15 or a little bit before the show? Oh, very good. Very good. Yeah, thanks for calling back in. I appreciate that. And thank you for your kindness. Go ahead with the question.
Yes, my question was I was curious about the various, aside from Christianity, the various heretical groups that we had, like the Sadducees and the Susim, I don't know how to say that in English, Karaim. Like what was distinctive about each of them, one from the other? What was its significance in their historical placement, in the context of...
Is that like from the Pharisees and the Sadducees? Is that kind of your question?
No.
Oh, what was it?
For the Pharisees, I know that's from Jews, but I mean the other ones.
The Sadducees?
Right.
Okay,
got
it.
Sadducees, the Karaites, the Susim, I don't know how to say that in English.
Gotcha. Okay, perfect. Okay, Shlomo, thank you so much for calling in.
Thank
and
you.
Let's go ahead and hang up, and you can tune in for your answer, okay?
Thank you.
Shalom. Bye. All right, Rabbi, go for it.
So the question is asked about who are these not well-known sects of the Jewish faith that we see recorded extensively in the late ancient world, not just by Josephus. It was Pliny the Elder. It's all over the place. So, in fact, let's just take Josephus, because Josephus, no doubt, is our most important first-century historian. Josephus identifies 6 different sects of the Jewish faith at the time. The Perushim, which means those who hold themselves separate. Like the word Orthodox, incidentally, it wasn't the name that Jews adopted for ourselves. Like, we didn't go, let's call ourselves Orthodox. No, when the Reform and Conservative movement, actually when the Reform movement began, it was just Judaism, and then they got, we need something to define this, to define what was traditionally Judaism. So Orthodoxa, the correct opinion Judaism, became the name that was used about us, and then it became a conventional term. So the Pharisees, of course, are most prominent. Essentially, all of Judaism today are descendants of Pharisaic Judaism, and all other theological groups from the Second Temple period disappeared. The Tzedukim, the Sadducees that are mentioned extensively, both in the Christian Bible and in the Talmud, this was a group that was a breakaway. The breakaway of Judaism always were personal. That means if you trace back, how did it start? It's not like some guy is going, I don't know about that oral law. No, what happened was it was a big fight, and there's something unique about oral Torah. That means we have 613 commandments. I'll do the 60-second version of this. But the Torah says many, many commandments. Doesn't tell us how to do it. You should afflict your soul on Yom Kippur. What does that mean? Well, the oral Torah explains precisely what that means. As an example, slaughter an animal in the manner I have shown you, Deuteronomy 12:21. The oral law, which is conveyed orally. So that tells us what shechita is and how to slaughter an animal properly, but you won't find it anywhere in the Jewish scriptures. Now, if there's going to be a breakaway sect of Judaism over a personal issue, what will be jettisoned? What will be attacked? What will be attacked is the oral Torah. Why? Because the oral Torah means that those who are conveying it, who are those who are passing on these oracles, those who are vested with this unique mandate, that means that they are the vessels of God's teaching. If you're saying they're bad people, that means that what they're conveying has to be called into question. And that's where the Sadducees began, and then they were a group that rejected the oral Torah. They were a group that did not believe in life after death. They didn't. That means when you died, that was it. That's why they were sad, you see. Okay, sorry, that's a Christian joke, and I just plagiarized it. So that's of the Sadducees. Now, most germane to our question, This group, incidentally, like all heresies, I can't believe that happened, that's okay, but this group, like all heresies, disappeared after the destruction of the Second Temple. Now, they were in cahoots with Rome. That's very important. They were a group that the Romans trusted them to collect taxes. They were like the elite, and a priestly elite. And they actually played a very important historical role with the Jewish people. Not so much that they gained many converts to their groups. They were not very successful in that sense. Josephus and other historians widely attest that, in fact, the Sadducees were considered an elitist group, and the Pharisees had the hearts of the people. So, but why this is significant is that the war with Rome really didn't begin with Rome, between Jews and Romans, but it began between Pharisaic Jews, and I'll break that down in a moment, and Sadducees, and then the Sadducees called in the Romans and said, hey, protect us from this much larger group, because they were certainly they were sectarian. But they had a lot of power in the temple. That is certain. So that's where the Sadducees come in. But then you have a group called the Zealots. Now the Zealots theologically were Pharisaic. They didn't have any different belief than the Pharisees, but they believed it was vital to fight against Rome, and no matter what, not to surrender Jewish autonomy over the land of Israel, and to fight the Romans. And they went way too far. They went too far. The sages told them. The sages also were operating with a prophecy from Daniel 9 that the temple was going to be destroyed 490 years after the first temple was destroyed. So the sages recognized that the destruction of the temple was imminent, but the zealots were as such that they would actually burn down storerooms. They would essentially force the hand of the Jews to go into battle against the Romans that the rabbis suggested that they don't do. And this if you're familiar with the book of Jeremiah, this has to sound very familiar to you, because history always repeats itself. Thus, you have the same problem with Jeremiah, where you have the prophet saying, don't fight Babylon, and then you have the rabbi saying, don't fight Rome. So these were the kinds of groups that had an enormous historical impact on Jewish history, and today we certainly see the characters again come up over and over again. So that's basically a general idea of the most well. Now there's another group that if you would ask 100 years ago, no one would care, and that is the Qumran community. That was another sect.
Is that the Essenes or?
The Qumran community, we know about from three sources. We know about it from Josephus. We know about it from Philo of Alexandria, a Jew, a Hellenistic Jew, and we know about it from Pliny the Elder. So, but what's important is, in all of the documents that we've discovered in Qumran since 1947, there is not one place where the group, whoever's collecting this, where they don't identify themselves as Essenes, ever. And there's actually a big debate over what the word Essene means. I've actually gone through what I think are 20 of the best reasons or explanations for the word Essene, but we don't really know. So however, what we see of the way they live their lives, and what we are told, most importantly by Josephus and by Philo, Pliny the Elder is probably lied about his knowledge of this Dead Sea Scroll, about the sect that was in the Dead Sea Scroll area. That group was destroyed in 68 during the war with Rome, but they became very important historically to us only in modern times because of the most important biblical discovery, which began with a Bedouin boy named Muhammad Adif. So, but the breakaway sects in general began personal, political. It always is. It's always a family fight. It's not. It's not like it just starts with someone not showing someone else the right respect, and they go, "Aha, I'll show you," and that's where it took off from.
Isn't that how the Karaite movement began? I heard a story where someone was supposed to be like elevated to the next position, and then when they found out someone else got mad, and all of a sudden created a big riff.
Right, exactly. So that what you have again is you have who is going to be. This is the early Middle Ages. Who is going to be the Reish Galusa? Who is going to be the Exilarch? Which means that the house of David, there is an authority, just like in the Second Temple period, there, even though, let's take Zerubbabel, a very well-known biblical figure, who is from the Davidic house. He was a governor in Israel, not king, but he was the great-grandson of a king, so of a Davidic king. So after the destruction of the Second Temple, there continued to be a Reish Galusa. Those Reish means the head. Galusa, it's an Aramaic word, but actually it's so close to Hebrew. It has the definite article. The construct is Aramaic. So Reish Galusa means the head of Golus, the head of the exile, of the Jewish community of exile. So therefore, who should get it? And there was a big fight who should get it. The other one didn't get it. And he said, really? I'm not going to get it? Yeah. Then I don't believe in your oral law, and it went off in a spin. Today, there's the Karaite movement, although they were very significant in an early time. It's a group that flourished in modern-day Iraq, in that region. At one time, it was today, there's a small sect of them, serious group. I mean, not many. In Israel, for example. Here in America, people call themselves Karaites, because they go onto Karaite websites and call themselves Karaites, but they're not. They call themselves Karaites, but let's say the Karaites in Israel or in Turkey, or again, we don't know the numbers, but it's not. These are the serious guys and this is again, it's a relic. We're not. The war is over. I mean, they're not. But the really religious, the very serious Karaites. See, the Karaites in America, they'll go to McDonald's and have a cheeseburger. but the Karaites in, let's say, in Israel, they not only would see, they couldn't. What happened was Torah says you have to slaughter an animal a certain way. It doesn't say it. They say there's no oral law. So how do you slaughter an animal? But they come up very often with their own traditions. They had to. I mean, you cannot keep many commandments. You have no clue what it means. So they came up with their own traditions. So the Karaites, I'm talking about those who are serious. So these Karaites actually came up with their own form of slaughtering an animal, and they, in fact, this will shock you, won't eat from an animal that is slaughtered by a Jew. They have their own oral law. That means initially it began as we don't believe in the oral law, but then they had to invent their own oral law because there's no way anybody can do it. And the ones who are serious, again, there are groups on Facebook, Karaites, this, that. These guys, I'm not saying every one of them, but these guys will, they'll go to Burger King because they don't, I'm talking about the more serious guys will go, we don't eat what they'll call rabbinate slaughtering. We have our own, and they'll only eat that. And when they're in America, if they're traveling, they'll eat only vegetarian. But there's not many of this. It's like it's like the Samaritans. This is a relic. It's not like what it once was.
I'll tell you what's really interesting to me is the ones who tend to side with the Karaites more than anybody I've seen are actually the ones coming out of the Messianic movements, because they go in the Messianic movement and then they basically spit on everything if the rabbi says it, because the rabbi has rejected Jesus, so they must not know anything. But then, like you pointed out many times, they're wearing a yarmulke, they're wearing tzitziot, which is all part of defined in the oral law, and burning of candles and things like that. So it's like, whatever. Okay, we'll move on. We got another caller. Caller, thank you for being patient with us. Tell us your name. Where are you calling from?
Yeah, this is Thomas and Kathy Martin calling from North Carolina.
Thomas and Kathy Martin, welcome to Texas. How are you, Thomas?
Thank you. Oh, we're doing just fine. I want to say shalom to both of you.
Thank you.
And I would like to ask a question of Rabbi Tuvia.
Very good. Bring it on.
Okay, I've been doing extremely large amount of studying. And yesterday I was reading Jeremiah 7:22. And it says that I did not speak with your forefathers, nor did I command them on the day that I brought them out of Egypt concerning a burnt offering or a sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went back and was looking at Exodus 12:25 through 27, and it says, "It shall come to pass when you enter the land that the Lord will give you, as He spoke, that you will observe this service." And then in 27 it says, "After your children ask, it says you shall tell them it's the Passover service to the Lord." So my question is, for a Christian, wouldn't this create a major problem? Because God clearly tells us that on the day of the original Passover that it wasn't a sacrifice. And is it also, from what I'm reading out of Exodus, did the Jews not celebrate Passover until they entered the land, as it says in Exodus 25?
Okay, just a question, if you wouldn't mind. Your voice was breaking up a little bit. Would you just give me to the question exactly? I didn't quite hear the question clearly. If you just would repeat it again, my apologies.
And the condensed version is, if you could pop it all off in one sentence, just real crystal clear, that'd be great.
It could be a couple sentences. I want to make sure. I don't want to answer a question that I'm not being asked. So,
right.
Yeah.
All right. In Jeremiah 22, it states that Hashem did not command them on that day concerning a burnt offering or a sacrifice. And then in Exodus 25, it says that that when you enter the land, that's when you shall observe this service. So my question is, doesn't this create a problem for the Christian who thinks that Jesus is actual sacrifice when Hashem said that He didn't command a sacrifice on that day?
Okay, this is a very, very good question.
Okay,
thank you.
Very good. Thomas and Kathy Martin, thank you for calling in. We'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Thanks,
man. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Okay, just for clarify for me, Rabbi, I've got Jeremiah 22 where God commanded no sacrifice or burnt offering, but in Exodus 25 He actually did. Now I'm not sure if that's the question or not, or is it the fact that it's about an actual sacrifice on Pesach? That's what I'm kind of confused about the question. Could you clarify for me?
Yeah, sure, of course.
Okay.
So Jeremiah was dealing with essentially Jews for Jesus. That may sound crazy because Jews for Jesus began in 1973 and Jeremiah lived 2,500 years ago. Jeremiah chapter 7, this chapter, is one of the most important oracles in this holy work. And in fact, it nearly got Jeremiah killed. Now, what was happening is that we have to have a historical context and what is Jeremiah conveying. The historical context was that Jeremiah lived, unless you know when he lived, what was going on, this chapter and the following chapter 8 are really one capsule together, is that Jews believe that the blood will save me. The Jews were saying, we don't have to worry about the temple being destroyed. That will never happen in a million years. We could fight Babylon and we will be successful, as the false prophets were telling them, and they were lies. And And Jeremiah is saying, you fools, if you think blood sacrifices will save you, you are making a very serious mistake. Don't stop with your whining and screaming. The temple, context, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord are these. He says, you don't get it. These kinds of sacrifices God doesn't even want. And he even says, take your sacrifices and put it on your flesh, which means there's no even point. Why don't you mix your sacrifices with your hamburgers and eat it, because your sacrifices are not going to save you. When I say save you, meaning if you've studied Isaiah, if you studied Hosea, if you have washed your mind in the passages of Tanakh, all this is bouncing on every page of the prophets. This was the fundamental error of Jews always, that ritual and sacrifice will save us, ritual and sacrifice will save us, and therefore how we treat other people is not important. The most important thing is if we bring our sacrifices continually, so that will save us. So all the prophets are going, you fool, that won't save you. God doesn't even want you to save. Now, if your sacrifice is one with a full heart, then it'll be acceptable. Psalm 51. But the problem is, you don't treat people right. The problem is, you think that you can do this ritual. We all do it. We all think this way. I eat kosher, so therefore, I can do what I want. I don't have to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, and so on.
Right.
And God will be on my side, because after all, got the blood, covered in the blood. And if you're covered in the blood, and that's what Jeremiah is going up against. Now, of course, the Jews were commanded to bring the Passover sacrifice. I'm just going to take that as an example. Of course they were when they went out of Egypt, but the sacrifices was not a Passover sacrifice. Was not. I'm just using this as an example. I can do this. Spend an hour on these two chapters. But just give you an example of Passover sacrifice was not a burnt offering. It was in fact the sacrifice that someone brought because they were faithful. Killing a lamb in the ancient world in Egypt was a capital crime. If you were willing to publicly kill a lamb, which the Egyptians venerated, meaning you were willing to risk your life and publicly put the blood of the lamb on the outside of the door, that means your fear of God exceeded your fear of the Egyptian soldiers. And therefore God said, oh, really? Then you're worthy of being redeemed. That's the whole key point. So it was roasted, but it's not a whole burnt offering. In fact, it had to be eaten. It wasn't a carbon oila. It wasn't the carbon that was completely burnt up. So the key point is what we have in view here is that these other offerings, the whole burnt offering and so on, that's not what was important, and that's not what God was commissioning you for. But of course, none of this works for Christianity. Jeremiah chapter 7 is a theological disaster, is kryptonite for the church, because Jeremiah is echoing what we find in Hosea 6:6 and Micah 6:6 and in Psalm 51 and in Psalm 40 verse 6 and 7, verse 7 and 8, depending on which Bible you're using. And that is saying, what are you obsessed with sacrifices? God would much rather have you be faithful. It doesn't say in addition to, but he would rather have obedience than a sacrifice. So this was, now what's going on here? So a Christian will say, well, what do you mean? You have a whole book of Leviticus that's all about sacrifices, okay? That's what any Christian would say. Any Christian would go, oh, so you can just throw Leviticus out the window? So listen carefully. The very word, the English word sacrifice, is a big disaster. What? It is. That means the word sacrifice, this word that's conventionally used for the offerings, for the zevachim and so on, is a disaster. Because what does sacrifice mean? Sacrifice means I sacrifice myself for you. I died for your sins. It actually conveys something Christological, the word sacrifice. But if you look at the language of Tanakh, it's not called a sacrifice, it's called a korban. What does the word korban come from? A korban is a Hebrew word. It's also in Arabic. It's also in Indonesian. What does that mean? Korov, to come close to Hashem. Doesn't mean, so once you're ready saying the word sacrifice, you might as well play Christmas music. I don't know what to tell you. The English word sacrifice, this conventional word, implies that something had to die in your stead, which in fact is not the case. The function of every korban is to bring the person who offers it to be karov, to be close to Hashem. But if you are abandoning all of God's commandments and you are not living faithfully to Hashem, and most importantly, there's no social justice, then you can't get korban. You're not close to God. Your sacrifice won't work. Why? Because it ain't a sacrifice, it's a korban. That means if you're going to be cheating on me and I see on your cell phone the text messages that you're getting messages from your girlfriend on Facebook, then don't try to come home with flowers and chocolates. I don't want it. Now, flowers and chocolates might enhance a relationship, a monogamous marriage, a holy marriage. So it's nice to bring your spouse flowers or whatever. But if you're cheating, then these things are appalling. I don't want to keep your flowers if you come home and you stink from your secretary's perfume. That's what's happening here, and that's what's happening with the Jews. They think that this can save them. I'll go on this, but that's what Jeremiah is conveying. And in the next chapter, he says, don't follow these false prophets. He says these lying scribes with their lying pen, Jeremiah 8, verse 8, and so on. So that's what we have in view in Jeremiah 7. When did I tell you about all this? But this did I commend you. It's a very, very beautiful chapter. Jeremiah, if you cross over to Jeremiah 27, you'll see that Jeremiah almost gets killed though because of this oracle.
Interesting. And so basically, in short, if you're willing to sacrifice the Egyptian god lamb, man, if you're willing to sacrifice,
come close to God. You see where the word sacrifice itself is pregnant with a Christology. This is so dangerous. This is why Jews go, what? Mm-hmm. But the English language is, you know what's a good word, a good English word? And that's the word atonement. That is a good word. Because atonement is a not that old an English word, and it comes from the word at one meant, becoming one with God. And that's really a nice word, atonement. When someone atones for the sins, they become one with God. That's nice. Sacrifice conveys is Christological.
Yeah, that's true.
Use the word korban, come close.
Cool.
That's all. But if you don't try to come close, if you have, love letters on Facebook, what do you think? Hashem sees everything. Jeremiah says, don't start in. And that's what Jeremiah is saying. That's what Isaiah says in chapter 1. He says, I don't want your sacrifices. Mm-hmm. The smell stinks to me. When you pray, I won't listen to you, and so on. I don't want your... Doesn't mean God doesn't want new moons. He doesn't want fake new moons. That's
right. He wants faithful.
I know there are a lot of questions, so I...
Yeah, well, that's okay. To conclude that statement, I was going to say, to add to what you said earlier, so for the person who's in a New Testament belief system, believing in the man God, if Jesus was the Passover sacrifice, if you are willing to sacrifice, if you are willing to slaughter this Jesus lamb and get rid of it and actually put it out there, knowing that it's an Egyptian god, not something for Hashem, then you can be redeemed. God will actually allow you into His fold. So there you go. All right, Rabbi, we'll take this call. Caller, thank you for being patient. Tell us your name. Where are you calling from?
Hello. My name is Daniel. I'm calling from Israel.
Daniel from Israel. How are you? Welcome back to the show. What's the question for Rabbi?
Thank you. Great. I just want to say that you two are doing Vodat Kodesh Mamash. So thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you.
I have two questions. if the rabbi only wants to answer one, then I would guess it would be the second one.
Okay.
I'd really appreciate that. My first question is that a lot of people tell me that the Jews in the Second Temple period were actually Edomites. They take the occurrence with John Hyrcanus, who conquered Mia, and then possibly converted the local Edomites to Judaism.
Daniel, let me, if you don't mind, it's breaking up a little bit. Are you talking on a cell phone or a landline?
Cell phone.
Okay, is there another position you could find, maybe outside or something, where we might be able to hear you a little better? It's breaking up a little bit.
I would try.
Okay, thank you.
So go ahead.
So they tell me that a lot of Jews today are actually Edomites, because the Edomites assimilated with the people of Judea. But I know for a fact that the rabbis nullified those conversions because they were made forcibly, which is against the halakha.
Yes.
But still, I don't find any source for that. All I find is like the Jewish Encyclopedia, which says that indeed the Edomites assimilate with the local Jews.
Okay, and let's.
Did you get that?
Yes, go ahead.
I understand. I got his question.
Okay, let's go with question number 2, which is his primary question. Go right ahead.
My second question would be an observance that I made with actually a lot of anti-Semitic people that I'm talking to online, and it seems like there is a circle which they can't get out. It's like whenever they tell me, that Jews are behind Bolshevism, and then I show them the numbers and show them, well, it is not true. Jews had very little to do with Bolshevism. They immediately revert back to the New Testament. They say, well, Jesus knew who you are. You are sons of Satan, serpents, money changers. He knew who you are. But then when we talk about the New Testament and I show them that it just can't be a true book, but it's actually a fictional book, they revert back to anti-Semitism. As if they use anti-Semitism to prove Christianity and use Christianity to prove anti-Semitism. It's like
a little circular reasoning.
A cycle they can't get out. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so Rabbi, you got a question out of that, per se?
His opinion about that.
Okay. Rabbi, are you clear on the question format for that?
I think I get the question.
Okay.
I believe I do. Now I'll take that on. That's not a problem.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you so much, Daniel. I appreciate you calling in, and we'll talk to you soon. Let's hang up and we'll turn to the answer. Shalom. Bye bye.
Yes.
All right.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I'll answer them in the order I heard the questions. The first was, as it turns out, although it is widely known that Judaism, among all the Abrahamic faith and the foundation of other religions that were Abrahamic that would follow, we don't try to convert people to Judaism. In fact, if anything, we try to talk them out of it. The reason is very simple, and that is, I don't mean this in any bad way, but Christianity believes that if you're not a Christian, you're going to go to hell. Okay? In Islam, it is widely believed that the consensus is that if you are not a Muslim, you're going to go to hell. I should say with Islam, there are some, based on a passage in the Quran, that's not the case. But I'm not going to go there. That's not for me to say. It's not for me to tell Muslims what they should believe. But there is a passage that would indicate that if those of the book would follow their faith, verse 62, that in fact that they will go to heaven, and they have nothing to fear, the Quran says. But let's just take conventional Islam today. Generally, the consensus is, unless someone never heard, that a person's going to go to hell if they're not a Muslim. But Judaism differs here in that if a person is not Jewish, meaning not a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but they are a righteous Gentile. After all, Job wasn't Jewish, neither was Abraham. But if they are faithful to the God of Israel and keep the fundamental commandments for all the world, they are called the 7 Noachide laws, which are general categories of law, then they have a place in the world to come. And therefore, there is not only no imperative to convert someone who's not Jewish to Judaism, but we really would often try to convince people to consider not converting to Judaism, remain B'nai Noach, because once someone becomes a Jew, converts to Judaism, so then we may very well put that person in grave danger. Now, if a person is not Jewish and they want to eat a pork sandwich on Yom Kippur while driving to the movies, no sin. Convert to Judaism, this becomes a great sin, and you can't undo a conversion. So, therefore, in Judaism, there's this completely separate standard, and one may even say that the Noachide faith, religion, din in Arabic, is maybe the oldest religion in the world. It's the religion of Abraham. So now that all being said, that the Jews don't try to convert non-Jews to Judaism. We try to. If they insist on it, so then they're entitled. There are people who feel that they must be Jewish, and it's for them to make that decision. But everybody has lunatics, and the Jews can. If there's the lunatic Olympics, we have our share of them. And if you're not sure, go to the New York Times every day and look at the writers, and it reads like a Borough Park phone book with Friedman and Goldberg and Greenstein and so on, and they're the biggest enemies of the Jewish people, or the Guardian and so on. So we have our crazies, and we did have one nut job, really a wacko. He was from the family of the Maccabees. He was from the family that rebelled against the Greek in the famous Chanukah. Now, he is already a grandson, and his name was Yohanan Hyrcanus, and what he did was he took a group of non-Jews, and we're dating now to date maybe in about the year 130, let's say, about there, 130 BCE. So this is now nearly 60 years before Pompeii. He forcefully converted a whole group of non-Jews who were called Edomites. Now, he forced them to convert. And everybody knows about this because it was so outrageous. Truthfully, when I teach Jewish history to Jewish yeshiva students, this is and I tell them that there was such a, they go, really? What? It's like Jews are so embarrassed by this, who don't know this. But we had one. Now, as you can, and Herod, incidentally, was a descendant of this group that were forcibly converted. And of course, the rabbis did not accept that conversion because, after all, it was a coerced conversion, and a conversion has to be completely voluntary. If someone puts a sword to your throat and says, become a Jew, that conversion doesn't mean anything. So therefore, the descendants of this group that were forced to convert often resented the fact that they weren't accepted as Jews. They weren't accepted because the original conversion was done by force, which is antithetical to anything Judaism teaches. In classical Judaism, if I put a gun to your head and say, love me, say I love you or I'll kill you, and you say I love you, so that statement is meaningless. And that's essentially what happened. This was a Maccabee leader and a high priest he was born, I think, at around 160 he was actually born right about at the same time of Antiochus Epiphanes IV, meaning he was born in the 160s, and he died much later on. But he was a disaster, and this created the Edomite sect, which were not real Jews. Now, this will explain why Herod is so angry at the Jews and angry at rabbis, because they didn't accept his conversion, and he wanted to be king of the Jews, but the Torah says you can only have a king who is your brother, and an Edomite is not a true Jew, and therefore it's not accepted. So I think does that answer the question? I think so. Does that?
Yeah, I think so. It was kind of a tricky question altogether, but also we do have another caller on hold right now.
All right, let's go to
move?
The other caller.
Okay,
but that's basically the story of this group. The Edomites are very important, a very significant group because it's Herod's family. Herod's going to kill a lot of rabbis. He's a nutcase. But let's move on.
Got
to
it.
The next
and yes, and if you want more clarification on those questions, just send Rabbi an email, tobiasinger1@aol.com. Okay, right after this call, we'll move right into the hot topic for the day. So we'll go ahead and take this call now. Caller, welcome to the show. Thanks for listening in. What's the question for Rabbi? Nope, they're listening to us. I can hear myself.
Shalom.
Shalom. Do me a favor real quick. Will you please turn down your computer speaker real fast?
Yes.
Okay.
I have a quick question for the rabbi. First off, thank you for all the work that you do.
Thank you.
My question concerns a verse of scripture in the great prophet Isaiah 65:20.
65. I still hear some background noise. Is there any way you could turn down your speaker that you're watching the program through?
Sure.
Thank you.
Isaiah 65:20.
Okay, I'll pull that up on the screen here. Go ahead.
And what it deals with, it has something in there that puzzles me a little bit. It talks about a child that dies at the age of 100, and I know this is in the Messianic age, so is there death in the Messianic age? Or does people just live a real long time, or what? I'd just like the rabbi's input on this.
Okay, so is there death?
Can I ask a favor again? Please find it in your heart to forgive me. I just was very hard to understand what you're asking. Could you repeat your question again? I'm sorry.
In the verse, Isaiah chapter 65, verse 20, it talks about a child that dies at 100 years of age. So do people just live a really long time in the Messianic age? Will there be death or no death at all?
I see. Because it says there should be no more that's an infant of days, nor an old man that has not filled his days. For the child shall die at 100 years old, but the sinner being 100 years old shall be accursed. Okay. Did that, Rabbi, did the question become more clear?
I think so. I'm just not sure I understand.
Well, there's a Christian concept. There's no more death, no more pain, no more anything, in the Messianic age, so to speak, or in the world to come. And maybe that's the confusion. Maybe there's a confusion between the world to come, so to speak, or the actual time of the Messiah when he does actually come. Is there? Am I kind of on the right path there at all?
Yes. I was just wondering because I know the resurrection of the dead occurs after the Messiah comes, but here they're talking about the child dying at 100 puzzles.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So.
Okay. Thank you for calling in. Just let's go ahead and hang up, and you can listen in. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
All right. So. What should strike you when you're looking at a passage like Isaiah 65 verse 20, where it says, Lo yihem misham oid avel yomim v'zokin asher lo yimale es yomov ki hanar ben meyo. That should get you thinking. For the youth, ki hanar ben meyo, who's 100 years old, will die, v'hachaita, and a person, the sinner, of the age of 100 will be cursed. That's the key. So the question is, how could a person who's 100 years old be called a child? That should right away capture your attention. So the text is conveying a period of time where people will live for such a long time that if somebody would be 100 years old and die, and the word there is very important, is not oven, meaning is not a word that conveys a intentional sin, but an unintentional sin. The word there is v'hachoyte ben mea shana. Now, the word chayta is what does that word mean? The word chayta means a sin, but the problem is that when you're reading your English translations, it's all the meaning is stripped out the window. So there are many in Hebrew, as I say, and I'll keep saying because I want to plug it into your head. Hebrew is biblical Hebrew is a very small language. So when you have 3 or 4 different words that seem the same, then there's got to be a big difference because it's extremely precise language. So the language there is v'hachoyte ben mea shana. And then certainly if someone is a sinner and he'll be 100 years old when he dies, that he will be cursed. So what does that mean? So the text is saying, first of all, the person is not a person who is in rebellion against God, but the chayta, see Leviticus chapter 4, that tells us about the unintentional sinner. That if some people will actually live, because we're going back to a period of people pre-flood, where people will live, 1,000 years and so on. If you see someone who dies at 100, you could probably guess that will be like a child, a 100-year-old. Let's say a 100-year-old in the time of Adam, in the pre-flood world, that was a baby. That was like nothing. Today, read the book of Psalms today, how long does a person live? 70, 80, 90. But in this time, if somebody is someone, now the word chatos really doesn't mean sin. It technically, if you look in the book of Judges, it means to miss. There's actually a context for this where, for instance, archers who was such a great shot that they never missed. So the word is chet. Chet really means to miss the mark. That doesn't mean you're in rebellion, but you're missing the mark. So in such a time where people will live for very, very long periods, again, have huge lifespans, a person who dies at 100, what could we say about them? We could say about them is that they committed unintentional sins because there won't be rebellion in the Messianic age. And that's why we see the sin offering in the Messianic temple, the third temple. See Ezekiel 43 and 44. And then people will say, 100? That's just a child. Okay, so that's what's being conveyed there, that we're returning to a period where people lived, could live 1,000 years and longer, and therefore 100 years old, people go, what happened to him that he died so young? That's what's key. I just want to teach you how to read Scripture. When you come across a passage that refers to a 100-year-old person dying as a child, then you know immediately that should set off 1,000 alarm bells. And your focus immediately should be zooming in as, how could a 100-year-old be considered a nar, be considered a child? That's how I want you to study. Then everything will make sense, but get your foundation straight. That's a great question, so thank you for calling in.
Okay, perfect. Well, I think it's a good time now let's move right on into the hot topic for the day.
Sure.
Is the Old Testament God, the angry God of the Old Testament, versus the message of the New Testament is Jesus came to bring peace and love, and if you really want to experience the love of God, you've got to follow the New Testament concept. So, like I said, there's about 1 million ways to spin that, but and there's probably an excellent answer that you're fixing to throw at us. So let's move on into there. Callers' phone lines are closed. They will remain closed until after the hot topic is complete. If we finish early enough, we'll reopen the phone lines again. Feel free also to send your questions to tanaktalkquestions@gmail.com. Thank you, Rabbi. It is all yours.
I think this is one of the questions that I'm asked more frequently than any other. I'm asked this by Christians who say, well, the God of the Old Testament is an angry God. He's a God of justice. And the God of the New Testament is a God of mercy and love and forgiveness and grace. Okay. Now, at the outset, this really doesn't make sense unless you're a Marcion. And Marcion was a heresy of the 2nd century, very popular. In fact, this fellow from what is today Turkey advocated that there were, in fact, 2 different gods. He believed in the bianity, and in fact, the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament were completely incompatible. He didn't believe, like the Gnostics, that the God of the Old Testament was evil, but he was a God of anger, of justice, and no mercy. Now, although the Marcionite movement, which let's say started in 140, was eventually thrown out of court as a heresy, it had an enormous impact on Christian thinking and remains as a wretched legacy of the church to this day. And that Christians think, though, it's not logical. Why? Because all Christians today believe, they don't care what sect it is, that the God who moved the hand of Jeremiah moved the hand of Lahavdil Matthew. It's the same God. They say there's one God, so therefore it's impossible. But in fact, I would argue, actually, none of it makes any sense at all. Let me explain this. In fact, it's really the opposite. And that is that the God that we are presented with in the Christian, especially the letters of Paul, where we find doctrine, is in fact the angry God of justice and no love and no mercy. And that only the God of the Torah and only the God of the Hebrew prophets of blessed memory, the God of Avram, is Molei Rachmim, is full of mercy. People are going, really? What do you mean? I'll show you. I'll give you a very simple example so you understand this. Christianity teaches, and if you've never heard this before, that means that you've been living in Borough Park all your life and never heard a Christian talk before. If you go to any Christian service, what you're going to hear very, very quickly is that man is a sinner. This is Pauline Christology, very found all over the book of Romans, that man is a sinner. There is nothing you can do. There's no effort, no initiative that you could do on your own that could save you. No work can save you. You've been infected with the original sin, and therefore Jesus had to pay the price for you. The wages of sin is death, Romans chapter 6. Someone's got to pay the price. Now, you can't pay the price. You cannot earn your way to heaven. If you have never heard that, you have never met a Christian before. And if you were in a church or are in a church, you know, and most of my listeners have been. So I can't get away with setting up straw men and toppling it. The key is that the wages of sin is death, and someone has to pay the price. And Jesus paid the price for you. This is the most central issue. This is the most central doctrine of justification, that you can do no works of your own could save you, but someone has to pay the price for you. But you can't. So Jesus paid the price for you, and therefore you are covered in the blood of the unblemished Lamb, and then you're going to go to heaven. Okay? What I just told you now is I can't think of a doctrine that is more central to the Christian message than the one that you've just heard.
Right.
Okay. I'm not making anything up. I'm not trying to say something about it. This is what Christians believe. So I want to ask you a question. Think about this for a moment. Imagine that you did something very bad, and you're in the United States, and you're arrested, and you're brought before the judge, okay? And you're guilty, right? And the judge says that in order for you to, there's a fine that has to be levied that you have to pay, and it's not small. It's $1.1 million you have to pay, okay? And you're going to yourself, I'm in trouble, because if I don't pay that $1.1 million, I've got to go to prison for a long time. Now, there's in that courtroom, I happen to be there, just happened, and for whatever reason, I happen to take a liking to you. And I'm a billionaire, and therefore, for whatever reason, I feel like, you know what? I'll pay it for you. And I arrange with your attorney, and I say to the judge, if it pleases the court, I will pay the fine for this person. I will pay the fine for you. To me, $1 million is not that meaningful. To you, so the judge will say, no question, the judge will say, look, I don't care who pays it, just that is the fine that's been levied. So if you want to pay it on his behalf, that's fine, okay? And the judge accepts the money from me instead of from the person who doesn't have the money, okay? So the fine has been paid for the person. Now, I want to ask you a question. This judge who accepts my payment of the price for the person who has been charged, who is guilty, is that judge a merciful judge? No. That judge, there's no rachamim, there's no mercy there. There's no love there. What the judge is simply doing is, he is saying, someone's got to pay the price. If you don't pay it, then I'll accept it from him. But justice must take place. $1.1 million must be paid. And if you don't pay it, then you could pay it. But whoever pays it, once it's paid, you can go free. That judge is not merciful. There's no love in that judge. Even though the person may be crying and begging, he said, the judge will say, no, someone's got to pay the price, right? These are the wages. So this is the Christian model. And therefore, that judge has no mercy whatsoever. Now, here I want to give you now the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob of blessed memory. Here's the other model. The model is that you've done something wrong, and you're standing for the judge. And you've been told that you have to pay an enormous amount of money, or you're going to go to prison. And you go standing before the judge, and you begin to cry, and you begin to weep. And you've confessed what you've done and said, I did a terrible, terrible thing. What I did an awful, awful thing. I have sinned before God, as King David said. And I acknowledge my sin, as we see in 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 46 through 50. And the judge, God in heaven, we are told by the prophet Solomon, says that God will hear your confession and prayer in heaven. And the judge then says, I see now that you really regret what you've done. I see now that you have confessed your iniquity. I see now that you have turned away from your sinful ways. I forgive you. I want to ask you the question. As it says in Ezekiel chapter 18, verse 21 through 24, I want to say this: if you're a Christian, read it. Your life, eternal life, depends on this. If you read Ezekiel 18, verse 21 through 24, prayerfully, read it. It says exactly what I said. If the person who is sinful turns away from his sinful ways and does what is right and for the Lord, that none of his transgressions that he committed will be remembered against him. In his righteousness he shall live. And then God says these holy, delicious words, which you want to give Hashem so many kisses. He said, is it my desire at all that the wicked should die? Meaning, is it my desire at all that person should pay the fine? No, my desire is only that the person should turn away from his sinful ways that he might live. So I ask you, it's just me and you. I mean this. You're watching the show. You might be alone. Maybe you're sitting there with your wife and your child. I ask you honestly, which judge is merciful and which judge is one who has no mercy? I would posit to you that the Christian judge, the Christian God, has no mercy whatsoever. The Christian God simply says that the price has to be paid, and either you could pay it or, which you can't, so therefore someone else pays it in your stead. That's all justice. There's no mercy. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, if you look at, but that's why human sacrifice is an abomination. But if you look at the Kel Molei Rachim, the Kodesh Baruch Hu is full of rachim, is full of mercy. So the Almighty, blessed be His holy name, says, look, I don't want to punish the wicked. Did I make up these words? Are these the words of a rabbi in Indonesia? God forbid. This is straight, and I give you permission, like you need it. Open the New International Version. I don't care. Read Ezekiel. Now, the context in Ezekiel 18, by the way, so I'm not taking anything out of context. What's important is that Ezekiel condemns and opposes human sacrifice and vicarious atonement, that an innocent person should die for the sins of the wicked. Ezekiel 18, verse 21 is in that context, and Ezekiel, God, using his prophet, is saying, okay, now that we've said that no one could die for your sins, an innocent person can't die for the sins of the wicked, so now it's a big question. So what does the Rasha do? What does the wicked person do if no one could die for your sins? So Hashem says, turn away from your sinful ways, and your sins will not be remembered against you. They're gone, not just covered over. They're forgotten completely in your righteousness. And then Hashem says, why? Is it my desire to punish the wicked? Christian theology is yes. The Father's a demanding Father. He demands somebody the price. But the Christian Bible, but Romans 6 is opposed by the holy prophet Yechezkel, HaKodesh v'Hator, this holy prophet who says, God doesn't desire. God. Mm-hmm. So therefore, you have to ask a question in your life, because everything depends on it. This Shabbos, are you going to a synagogue, or Sunday you're going to a church? It's all at stake here. You have to ask yourself a question. You want to go with Paul, or you want to go with Ezekiel? I'm going with Ezekiel. What do you say? Right. So there's the answer. The answer is that the God of Christianity is an angry God, or is a God of justice and no mercy. Someone has to pay the price. If you can't, someone else pays it for you. The God of Tanakh, the God of Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, the God of David HaMelech, the God of Shlomo HaMelech, the God of our prophets of blessed memory, the God of Yechezkel, the Ribono Shel Olam, the Zisa B'Shef, the sweet Creator, He is Molei Rachimim. He says, I don't need anyone. No one has to pay a price for you. You confess what you did is wrong. You turned away. Forgotten. In fact, even go further, that if a person turns away from a sin and out of love for God, his sins are turned into a mitzvah. But that's beyond the scope of this broadcast. So therefore, it is the God of Abraham that is full of rachamim. In fact, that's his name. He's called Rachmano. He's called mercy. That's one of his names. Only the God of Tanakh is full of mercy, and the God of Christianity, lahavdil elef alfi avdolos, ben tumul tahara ben yom l'choshech, the Christian God, that God is one of complete justice and no mercy. He's willing. He just saying, look, I'll let somebody else die, pay the fine for you. Where's the mercy? There's none. Mm-hmm, right. The mercy is only in our Lord. In Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. And I speak to you, the viewer, who is a Christian. Would you consider to study, look up what I've shared with you? And would you consider accepting the God of Abraham in your life tonight?
Unbelievable. I will tell you this. I've got to put this out here. There is a lot of people who were in the Christian movement and even the Messianic movement who are coming out. And I'm not talking about just casual readers. I'm talking about people who are very, very highly actively defending with passion is not even the right word. It's almost with a vengeance in a way, who would defend Yeshua or Jesus and whatever, who are actually coming out. And when we'll be doing a testimony here soon of one particular person, it'll be I'll mention it later on. I'll create the ad, but it's through Rabbi Singer, through your work, and Rabbi Skovak, and so many others who are dealing with these issues that's helping these people come out. And so I'm I'm just totally delighted. That's so amazing. Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, phone lines are officially back open. Please do call in. Let me put that number back on the screen. Most of you have it memorized by now. 855-95-BIBLE if you ever happen to remember it on the fly and have access to, what do you have, the little numbers and letters that are on your cell phone? They used to make me so mad, Rabbi. They, one year, golly, back in the 80s, I had a little flip, like the old style phones, and it didn't have any letters to match the numbers. And it's like they asked this one question that I just knew, and you won like this really ridiculous prize. And they said, call in, and they had this acronym for the number. And it's like I could not for the life of me figure out what was A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So anyway, with all that said, okay, phone lines. Oh, somebody's calling in right now. I had the volume turned down. Thank you for tuning in and calling in. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from.
Hi, my name is Dean. I'm calling from Arkansas.
Dean, I know a Dean Hunt on Facebook. You wouldn't happen to be him, would you? Dean from Arkansas.
Yes, I am.
This is Dean Hunt. Hey, man, it's a pleasure for you calling in. Thanks for calling in.
Not a problem. I've tried many times, but y'all are really popular. So,
What's really interesting is the phone lines. It's a really high-tech system, but I don't know how to figure out how to do the holds, and I think it would cause more aggravation for people because so many people do call in that if everybody was able to get through, then they would just sit on hold forever, not realizing that they couldn't actually make it through. So in a way, I kind of like it this way, but I am glad you made the call and were able to actually get in. Please tell us your question.
Well, my question, of course, is for the Rabbi, and Rabbi, thank you for the recent add to your friends list as well.
Awesome.
I know that as far as Christology goes, and of course the teachings of Tanakh, Satan has a different purpose, meaning, and intent and such. But is there any type of rabbinical teaching that speaks of a possible demonic realm? And I guess that's the sum of my question.
I'd only ask you this question because I don't want to go on with a long exposition, and it turns out you're not even asking about that. The word demonic is really a very vague word. It's as vague as when Hillary refers to herself as spiritual, and no one knows what she's talking about. So could you, and I didn't mean that as a political statement, I'm just, what does that mean, demonic? Could you really be very, so I just address your question very direct, because I don't know what do you mean by a demon as distinct from Satan? That's really what I'm asking you, because I want to answer that question very directly.
Dean, can I jump in just to throw something in real fast?
Sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong on this because I only know what I see on Facebook. Okay, just to give you some contextual on where Dean may be coming from, is he was very much a Messianic teacher at one time, and he's searching this stuff out. And so I know when I was Christian and Messianic, they strongly believed in Satan the way the church believes in Satan, as well as demonic activity. Now, as I came to the knowledge of Tanakh only, began to realize through Rabbi Singer and through other teachers that Satan is not at all who the Christians say he is. He's not an opponent of God, etc., etc. But there still are demons, even though Satan himself is not an opponent of God. Is that
William? I apologize. That's why I'm asking him. I need him to tell me.
Okay.
I just need him because I need him to say, is a demon the same as Satan, or is it not the same?
That's what I'm trying to help clarify as well.
Yeah, Dean, tell me what do you mean specifically? Because I want to.
Well, yeah, William pretty much touched on it. Of course, Christology teaches that Satan was cast out of heaven and a third of the angels followed him, hence subsequently became demons, demonic, little minions and such. But, and I know that's pretty much indigenous to the New Testament scriptures, but I didn't know as far as the existence of that sort of demonic spiritual entity, evil in purpose and design, exists in any type of rabbinical teaching or anything, because I don't believe Tanakh touches on it, but I didn't know if there was something beyond, as far as in Judaism, that has any type of either accepts that notion or does not.
Interesting.
Okay, I got the question.
Great. Dean, thank you for calling in. I appreciate it. And appreciate your friendship on Facebook, too.
Not a problem. You gentlemen have a great day.
Okay, take care, Shalom.
Thank you. So this is really a very good question. So at the outset, it's very important for the listeners to understand that the Christian concept of Satan, which is all over the Christian Bible and very is found frequently, of course, in the book of Revelation, is basically the Zoroastrian dualism, the good God and the God of goodness and the God of bad God. It kind of fits well with a Gnosticism, which has that similar model, except with Gnostics, there were more than two deities. There are a lot more than that. So Satan in Tanakh is a blessing. And if Christian fell off your chair, I'm sorry, but our default baseline is that we're created in the image of God. And if God did not assign an angel to tempt us and to cast forth its blandishments to seduce us away from God, we would have no free will. And God tells us all over Tanakh that he created good, he created evil. Look at Isaiah 45, verse 7. Read Deuteronomy 30, verse 15. Openly, the Torah says, before you I placed good and evil, I did it. Now, Christians don't teach this. Christianity only superficially looks like it's Judaism plus Jesus, or Judaism is Christianity minus Jesus. There's nothing could be further from the truth. This is a dualistic concept, and incidentally, Christianity would be a wonderful host for such a spiritual bacteria, because if you can have Jesus as a God, a separate entity, a separate person from the Father, and the Holy Spirit a separate person from the Father, then you can have all these other forces. That's an environment, that's a petri dish where dualism of Satan could flourish and metastasize. So they all go together. It's a very good shidduch. It's a very good match between each other. So therefore, we see in the Bible that in 1 Chronicles 21, verse 1, connecting that with 2 Samuel 24, verse 1, we see there that why God wanted David to number the people, to do a census in order to bring about a plague is not germane, but we see openly that in Chronicles it was Satan, in 2 Samuel it was God. They're contradicting, they're not. It's the same thing. God used Satan to seduce David to do this. So therefore, Satan is here in order to give us free will. Without Satan, virtue would be impossible. But the question then becomes, are there sort of demonic spirits? Are there demonic spirits? So this is a very difficult question, but I'll answer this, and it probably won't be completely satisfying, only because we are going to have to walk into a realm which does not operate upon the natural laws or on our senses of our seeing, hearing, speaking, smell. Doesn't operate on that, does not operate with the laws of thermodynamics and gravity and anti-gravity. It's its own world. But the world always has to have a perfect balance at all times. There has to be in the world a perfect balance between good and evil. Now, if there are manifestations of Kedusha, of holiness, right? So there has to be, if only people had a numinous spiritual experience when encountering the God of Avram and studying the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu, but if someone would pick up a Bhagavad Gita, it would do nothing for them. So people wouldn't have any free will. So because there are sparks, I'm using the language of the Zohar or a Kabbalistic language, so this is really outside of it, I'm telling you now. So given there are sparks of Kedusha, a person feels Go to Yerushalayim, certainly there, it doesn't, you can feel it anywhere. Open the Torah and fill your heart and you'll dance. We study Torah every Shabbos in my synagogue here in Jakarta, and we clap for Hashem in the house of the Lord. But if a person feels the sparks of Kedusha, so there must be sparks of unholiness in the world. And that's the closest I can get to it. And you can call them demons if you want to. But it just means that these are forces that are, in essence, give people the feeling, that kind of feeling, that high, that masquerades as something that's holy, but it is there to counterbalance what is holy. So just like the sparks of holiness, there are sparks of unholiness, and that, now, I'm not really going into demons and that stuff. I'm going to stay off that. It's way beyond the scope of this kind of a show. But the shirish of it all is, the world has to have a perfect balance at all time. If there's no balance, there's no free will. Free will is jettisoned, then virtue is impossible. So therefore, there are sparks of Kedusha in the world, and therefore there are sparks of unholiness in the world. And God says, look, don't tap in to the sparks of unholiness. For example, people were able to speak to the dead using these dark sparks, this dark matter. I don't mean that as an astrophysicist. So the Torah says it's real, but Deuteronomy 18 says stay away from it. That's all. So that would be something very close to the concept of a demon. It counterbalances, so that if there are sparks of holiness and spirituality, there are sparks of negativity, and therefore we have complete free will. No one is going to ever say that a Jew is more spiritual than a Buddhist. It's not. It's about truth, and that truth is only based on Torah. It cannot be based on our feelings, our thoughts, our personal dreams. That has to be subordinate to the word of Hashem. And by this effort of drawing close to Hashem, it'll bring the coming of the true Mashiach quickly in our time.
I mean, and Rabbi, as I mentioned before, and just to kind of add to the whole demonic concept, what I've experienced personally in the church was with the whole speaking in tongues, which I did do. That is definitely for real. It is, and it even sounded intellectual. It sounded like it could have been a language. Unfortunately, there was no one there to translate properly. But other things as well. I mean, one time I had to sing, and I know if you've been a Christian or you know Christians, you've heard this whole thing about holy laughter. That happened to me too one time. I busted out in the middle of a church service while I was in the sound booth, unprovoked, and I could not stop for like 30 minutes. Okay, now
it happened to me also. I was watching.
Yeah, but watching George Carlin doesn't count.
So hard that thing, but that doesn't mean I
right.
respect it.
Right. But so going back, I personally do believe that was some sort of activity, but I don't believe it was holy. So you can actually research something too called the Kundalini spirit, and you'll see a lot of these videos that show these people that some of these researchers are attacking this Kundalini name to is very much like that which goes on inside the church. And like I said, it's very real, but I do also believe it's very unholy. That's just my personal opinion.
It was actually started by a guy named Brown in a Toronto church, and it's really a very young phenomenon in the church.
Wow.
Yeah, it began in the 1980s, 90s. You don't really have literature on that, let's say, in the 17th century of holy laughter. So, these are...
Right, yeah, sure.
I think he's a South African pastor, if my recollection is good. I don't recall.
That does sound familiar. Okay, Rabbi, moving on. Again, ladies and gentlemen, phone lines are open, so please do call in with your questions. Rabbi, as quickly or as long as you want, tell us a little bit about not the contrast, but the likeliness of how Christianity views Jesus versus how Islam views Muhammad. Did I ask that right?
Could you ask that question again?
Okay, Muhammad, wasn't he the one who kind of started the whole Islam thing? Or no, am I getting that backwards? This is anything outside of Christianity is not my specialty. You have to forgive me if I put it in the wrong, if I write the question wrong or whatever. So Muslims, from what I understand, they really hold Muhammad ultra high, just like Christians hold Jesus, in the sense of like worship and honor. Is this a true statement or is this false?
Oh, it's completely false.
Okay, explain if you will.
Right now, 100,000 Muslims are cringing.
Yeah, and again, pardon my ignorance, because I really know nothing about it at all. That's why I'm just presenting the question as I heard it. So.
Yeah. So let me just make this very, very clear.
Okay.
Muslims believe that Muhammad was an unlettered prophet. In fact, those are the words used in the Quran to speak of Islam's final messenger, the seal, and the same Hebrew word as the Arabic word. He's the seal of the prophets. But to a Muslim, the notion that one should worship Muhammad, or Muhammad was anything more than a messenger, is considered absolute blasphemy. In fact, if you want to insult a Muslim, call them a Mohammedan, and that's what some Christians do.
Right,
they
good
do
point.
That just to get at them.
Wow.
That's why, by the way, setting aside all the politics, the reason why is, the whole thing with making cartoons or images of Muhammad, why is it important? Why is this so important? Now, most Muslims hate it with what ISIS does and goes and kills people who make. That's not normative. But really, the idea of not making any image or drawing of Muhammad is because there are Muslims don't have cameras. Muslims don't take pictures, family photographs on Eid, on the holiday, and the whole family takes pictures. So how come a Muslim will take a picture of his sister-in-law but not take a picture of, or not draw a picture of Muhammad? Because they're afraid that people would come to worship Muhammad. That's why unfortunately, these crazies, these breakaway who are an embarrassment to Islam, are so odious, not to Christians, to Muslims. They're going, what are you doing? I mean, they will say that these guys who are doing these terrible things, because the ones who do the cartoons, in reality, they're not only not worshiping Muhammad, they are committing an act of derision towards Islam. But the key point is that to Muslims, Muhammad was nothing more than a messenger, and he was completely human, and he died, and he's buried in Medina, and the suggestion that Muhammad was in any way divine is considered a heresy. And you should know there were, just like Jews, we had our heresies. Believe me, Islam had its heresies, and as a result of that, there was some so-called Muslims that held that Muhammad was divine. And I say there were Muslims who held that. I want to be very careful, because every Muslim, they're not Muslims, and you're right, they weren't real Muslims. These were people who were considered completely aberrant in Islamic teachings, and they were thrown out the window. So therefore, you have to understand this critical point. And I even will say to my cousins, my Muslim cousins, it's not, as a rabbi, it is not my business to stick my cute Jewish nose in your faith, in your religion. But I would say that be careful, because some I hear, they mean well, but some will say, well, ecumenically, they'll say, oh, we both believe in Jesus. They'll say to Christians. It's not true. If you say La ilaha illallah, and you have nothing to do with Christianity. Christianity deifies Jesus as a God. Christians condemn it. The Quran condemns it, condemns the Trinity, specifically those who worship three. This is straight from the Quran. It's just, the Mary part, that's in question, and that Jesus is going to return, but he's not going to return as a savior. In fact, he's going to return and then live for 40 years, have a family, and then he's going to die and be buried in a grave that's already been prepared for him in Medina next to Muhammad. That's very important. So therefore, to Muslims, Muhammad was someone who submitted himself to God. In turn, God chose him, and the angel Gabriel, this is the Islamic belief, conveyed to him the oracles, the 114 chapters that we find in the Quran. And of course, there's also another very large area of tradition in Islam called the Sunnah. And this is the biography, the purported biography, the saying of Muhammad, the things that Muhammad approved of, that he tacitly approved of. This is found in the Hadiths. I know I'm using the word Sunnah and Hadiths interchangeably. For this purpose, they're not identical, but for the purpose of this program, I will use those interchangeably. But to a Muslim, there really isn't. I mean, if you say to a Muslim, if you say to my cousins that Muhammad was divine, it will be like cursing his mother. That's how offensive that is. The ultimate offense.
Okay, why do Muslims call God Allah? I mean, it almost seems like it's a different God that they're praying to. So where does Allah come from?
Oh, it's the same. It is the same word. In fact, it's not only the same word. It all comes from the word al, which means powerful. And therefore, there are many names for God in the Quran. You'll find not only Allah, but you'll find Ilah. I'll explain the difference in a moment. You'll find Rahman, let's say in Surah 19. Just like in Tanakh.
Okay, perfect. That's what I wanted to ask.
But
good.
It's the same Semitic language, but it's so close that, for instance, let's take the name Ilah, okay, which means God in Arabic and in the Quran. That word, it operates exactly like in the Ten Commandments. You shall have no other gods on my face. So that word Elohim in that context of Exodus 20 means a false god. And Ilah can mean a false god, like saying La ilaha illallah. There is no God, meaning false god, but Allah, the true God. So we use the same name, the same shoresh, the same root, which could mean the true God or a false God. So of course it's the same God. And I just say it, Christians who say that Muslims do not worship the God of the God of Abraham, when you say that to a Muslim, you are making yourself look like a complete idiot. Mm-hmm. And Muslims will laugh at you. They believe not only that Abraham was a prophet who was a Muslim, but doesn't mean if you walked over to Abraham and asked him, what's your religion, say, I'm a Muslim. That's an Arabic word. It means that Abraham submitted himself before God. And every Muslim believes that Yitzchak was a prophet. And every Muslim believed, in fact, most of the prophets, the 25 prophets in the Quran, were Jewish. And Yaakov was a prophet. So therefore they believe in the God of many, many prophets, including Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, of blessed memory. And Christians who tell Muslims that they worship moon gods and shmoon gods and all these things, I really want to save you embarrassment, because the Muslims are going, this person needs medication. They have no idea what you're talking about. They worship one true God, and therefore Islam has a unique status and great respect in the Jewish faith.
Nice. So would it be safe to say that Islam would be more properly categorized as another sect of Judaism, like the Karaites, who don't follow Judaism the way y'all do, the way we do, whatever?
No,
it's not even. So I'm just trying to get a final package to really wrap our head around what it is, because we heard so many lies about every denomination of everything for so many years. This is a great opportunity to just put it all flat out on the table. Give us an example how we should view, if we're not going to look at Islam as a pagan religion, what is the most clear-cut way of seeing a Muslim for what they really are? Because I know a few, and they're very loving and kind and God-fearing people. So what's the best way for every viewer here is going to hear this question again? Why do you say Muslims are not an idolatry. Why do you say this? Why do you say that? This is a good episode to refer to them, to watch this time slot so we can really clear the table once and for all on this topic.
So, first of all, I want to make it clear. First of all, it should be said that I can't imagine a religion, in Arabic, a din, that is less eclectic than Islam or Judaism. There's like, Judaism is, there's no, it's not eclectic. You know, there is one God and there is no other. Anechi, anechi, I am the Lord, and besides me there is no other Savior. Isaiah 43 verse 11. There is no one but God. And of course you have the refrain, which is that refrain, La ilaha illallah, is mentioned twice in the Quran, but there are so many other statements throughout the Quran which articulate that exact same message all over. See Surah 2 Al-Baqarah, verse 163. Does that mean that Judaism and Islam are identical? No. But I will say to you that it should be said that most Muslims don't really study Judaism. They don't. And most Jews don't study the Quran. They don't. Let's face it, most people just study their own religion. But when Jews or Muslims beginning to study the other faith, they're going, wow, So we're not identical. I want to be clear, okay? But on fundamental creeds of faith, that's why there is such deep respect. I remember I grew up, when I studied in rabbinical school, we were taught this. I had a rabbi, his name was Rabbi Victor Miller. I went to the Mir, which is one of the most famous Lithuanian yeshivas in the United States. It was on Ocean Parkway in Avenue R. And a block away was one of the great luminaries and giants in the Orthodox world. His name was Rabbi Avigdor Miller. Those who are Orthodox Jews will know exactly who he is. Those who are not will never have heard of him. But he was a revolutionary teacher, and he had an enormous impact on me. I remember him, and when we were in yeshiva on Ocean Parkway Avenue R, all we had to do was walk a block up Ocean Parkway, and we would study, and he would give classes. It was packed, and his breadth of knowledge was extraordinary. And he would say this. He would say, look at the Yishmaelim, the Bnei Yishmael, that the women are tzniut. They dressed modestly. They wear a hijab. That's what he would say. And why do Muslim women wear a hijab? Why do they have such a whereas the Christians run around dressing like I don't know what, that here the children of Yishmael, the women are so modest, they wear a hijab. And he says because they are from Zerah Avram, they're from the seed of Abraham. You understand? This is in the classical Jewish world. This is how we were taught. This is everything to us. So the religions are not identical, but I'll show you how much there is. Even though we are living in a time, let's not ignore the elephant in the room, where there's big problems, not among all. We have people who are not members but come to our congregation every Sabbath who are Muslims, and we do all of our programs together. There's no other synagogue we have a prayer room for Muslims in our synagogue. I think we may be the only one in the world. That's how many Muslims comes to our services. They study. They don't want to convert. We don't want them to convert, but to them, they become stronger in their knowledge by studying the Torah of Moses, which they revere. So, so to them, to the Muslim, there's even you'll hear Muslims who will say, let's say you'll take a Muslim who really is hates Israel. Now, there are many Muslims who are very pro-Israel. And I'm not getting into it, but there are, okay? But the key point is there are because there's a big problem we got going on politically. Thank you, politics, for ruining everything good. So what happens is that you will have people who are radically anti-Israel, okay, anti-Zionist, but they'll say still, as Muslims, Islam is not an eclectic faith. One like this, it's not a cult. But it's, the fundamental beliefs. You can't, if you don't say Muhammad's the final prophet, if you don't, you're out the door. But they will say, we don't, and I'm bringing a proof from the most hostile witness. They will say that we have a problem with Zionism, but we don't have a problem with Judaism. Now, they'll never say that about Christianity, because Christianity worships a trinity, which the Quran says is idolatry. So I'm bringing, you could take all over the place. You can say, we don't have a problem with Jew. What do you mean Islam doesn't have? So the key is that we're not identical. There are differences, but Islam has a very special status in Judaism. As I cannot walk into a church. Believe me, I have turned down many, many lectures in churches and so on, and I can't, but I can go into a mosque and pray there, and I have many times. That means it's not when they're praying, but I can ask them, may I use your mosque as a place to pray? And not a problem at all, because they worship one God and no other.
So the idea that Muslims seek out to kill Jews, that's just a big myth, right? Except for crazy ones like ISIS and stuff, right?
Well, let me be clear here. Muslims are, I'm just going to say it. If someone's going to be angry at me, so be angry at me. I'm not going to get into politics here, but everybody knows that today there are hundreds of thousands, not tens, but hundreds of thousands of Muslims who are being murdered, slaughtered. There's slaughter going on. In Syria, I don't have to say more. In the Persian Gulf, in Afghanistan, in Iraq. Every day, bombers are going on. Who's killing who? Muslim against Muslim. What's going on in Yemen right now? Shia against Sunni. So what really is happening is, unfortunately, this is what politics does. I'm not going to get into the political difference between Sunni and Shia, but it did begin with not a theological difference, but it was sparked by a political chasm, and it's most unfortunate. And I'll tell you this, I live in the largest Muslim country in the world, Indonesia, and, this is a Sunni Muslim country, and many of the Muslims who I speak to will say to me that Shia is not real Islam, and they're idol worshippers. And I remember being in Israel and being told that by the Arabs, because the Arabs who live in Israel are Sunni Muslims for the most part. Wow. They consider Shia complete idol worshippers, but they will never say that Jews are idol worshippers. Never. They could say Ikhbad al-Yehudi, kill the Jews, because it's an unfortunate situation. But in reality, if you don't cry, then there's something wrong with you. But what's happening today, tragically, is it is people who are identify as Muslims who are murdering, slaughtering other Muslims. It's a great tragedy. Civil wars are always the worst. Just like America's Civil War was the greatest loss of life. We don't even know how many Americans died in the Civil War. Probably the numbers are about 1 million. That's twice the number of Americans that died during World War II. And this is unfortunate, and please God, I hope that the true Mashiach will come quickly in our time.
Amen.
And it will solve this problem.
Yes. So for all you viewers out there, you've heard it now. If you encounter a Muslim on the streets, you'd have no reason to be afraid of them. They're your friend. I mean, Rabbi, you've said it before, every group has their kooks. Every group has their psychomaniacs. So just because they're wearing a Muslim t-shirt doesn't mean that they're Muslim the way Muslim is taught in the Quran. So thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, I want to just make a point here that also no Muslim will disagree with. The Quran and let's start with the Quran, which is the most sacred text in Islam, is a book that is not written in a cohesive chronological order. And if you don't understand a passage, the Quran, because it's not written in chronological order, you can have a chapter, let's say the 5th chapter, which was probably written at the very end of Muhammad's life, or somewhere between 630 and 632. Okay, it might have been the last, or maybe 108. But the point is that the Quran is not written in a way that follows a chronological order, and it's important for you to know that in Islam, according to the faith of Islam, that it must be, that means it is, they will tell you, is in fact not in chronological order. In fact, in the midst of a surah, you can have a sudden blast of a change, moving time, written in a different period, but according to the Islamic religion, it is supposed to be written in this order for theological reasons that are beyond the scope of this show. The point that I want to convey is, and this is no doubt, because of this, because of the way the Quran is recorded, and it is out of order, and the texts don't have that cohesiveness as other types of literature would, and that's in Islamic faith, that's how it must be. It is an extremely vulnerable work. That means it can be easily abused. These guys in ISIS, they can easily find a verse somewhere, rip it out of context, or not understand what is it referring to. Is it referring to that time, or is it referring to all future times? Or moreover, there is the hadiths or the sunnah, where here you have many of them that were invented later and are not authentic. They are not authentic sayings of Muhammad, but were invented, written later, placed in the mouth of the Islamic prophet in order because people wanted to go around killing people. So, and everything I'm telling you, every Muslim, and they're very, very careful that, in fact, every saying of Muhammad that's attributed to him has to have an isnad, which means it has to have a chain of conveying who heard it from who, and it has to be established. It's, again, complex, but the key point is, it would be a mistake to say that the Quran, that people who kill in the name of Islam are not reading a verse and saying we're supposed to kill everybody.
Right.
What it is they're not studying it in context, they're not reading the proper responsible tafsir, and therefore the way it's written, certainly the Quran is a text that is more vulnerable to abuse, and given also that there's hadiths that are not authentic, therefore those can be easily misused and abused to carry out the most vile acts. But it's not like these guys in ISIS are not quoting some verse somewhere. So they are, but it's not legitimate, it's out of context, and so on.
Got it.
And that point must be made.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Okay, we're going to take this next caller right now. This will be the final question for the day. So caller, thank you for being patient. Tell us your name, where you're calling from.
Hi, this is Aaron from Philadelphia.
Hello, Aaron. Welcome to the show. What is the question for Rabbi?
My question is, the Greek Testament claims that the Messiah is from Judah and also born of a virgin. The Torah says that the tribal lineage is through the father. And then Christians say if no sons, then the lineage goes through the daughter. And then they use 1 Chronicles 2:54 as proof for this, as a proof text. Why is this incorrect, and why does it list the descendants through the daughter in 1 Chronicles 2:53 to the end of the chapter?
Okay, perfect. Rabbi, got it? You good?
Who are you? Who are you?
Great question.
Call it more often.
Thank you, Aaron. Let's go ahead and hang up.
Excited, I forgot what you asked.
I wrote it down. We're good.
That was like, who are you? But please continue to call in, because those are brilliant questions. So I think
First Chronicles 2:54. So it's
well, the first question was that the tribe identity is conveyed to the father and not to the mother. This is stated in so many places in the Jewish scriptures. I'll give you, I don't even know how many examples you need, but let's go to the place where we would like to find it. Okay. And that is, we want to find it in the book of Numbers. Now, how does a holy book have a name that at first glance doesn't appear to be holy? Numbers. Well, the book begins with a census of the Jewish people and How many members are there of each tribe? And how do you figure out what tribe you come from? So read Numbers chapter 1, verse 18, and it says there, that the way you identify which tribe you're from, after all, a girl who's from the tribe of Levi could marry a boy from the tribe of Judah. So the son is from the tribe of Judah. Is not, you could say, I have family from the tribe of Judah, but father to father, I'm a priest. So the mishpachoisam, which means according to your family, means it has to be your biological family. Leveis avoisam, according to your father's house. And therefore only the father can convey what tribe you're from, never the mother. I'm going to address this. That's why you see in all the genealogies of what tribe anyone is from, it's always according to the father, not the mother is completely not relevant. In fact, that was the whole crisis in Leviticus of the boy who had an Egyptian father and a Jewish mother. He didn't have a tribe because he didn't have a... Now, this becomes when Christianity in the mid-80s of the first century will claim that Jesus was born of a virgin. So by adopting this new creed that Jesus didn't have a human father, they actually sabotage the possibility that Jesus can be the Messiah. After all, the Messiah has to be not only of the tribe of Judah, but also has to be from the house of David directly, and has to even come from King Solomon. And the key point is, the moment you say that Jesus was born of a virgin, then you have sabotaged the whole claim, the central claim that Jesus is the Messiah. Because if he doesn't have a human Jewish father with which to trace his genealogy back to King David, then he can't be Mashiach. So by claiming a person is born of a virgin, then that person can't be a Messiah anymore. Now, you ask, why did they do it? Well, they did it because by the time these Greek texts are being written, no one cared, no one knew, no one, so on and so forth. So that's the answer to that question. It goes according to your father, and there are Christians who say that Matthew, because there is also a contradiction, and a very blatant contradiction. We have two genealogies of Jesus. One is found in the beginning of the book of Matthew, and the other is found in Luke. And there's actually a distinction between Matthew and Luke of who is Joseph's father. And according to Luke, it was Haley, and according to Matthew, it was Jacob. So they don't know what to do with this. I mean, what was Joseph's father's name? But the key point is both genealogies, the one found in Matthew and the one found in Luke, insist that these are genealogies of Joseph, who was not the father of Jesus. Therefore, they are irrelevant. And this vacuous, fatuous, I don't know, come up with, like I should need a thesaurus here to do this show, this claim that Joseph adopted him is silly, because in order to adopt someone else had to give him up for adoption. Did God give him up for adoption? So this is all complete silliness. Now, the question then becomes, so now, what do Christians do? Oh boy, they have to do circus acts. They have to join Cirque du Soleil and do these torturous circus acts to try to in some way prove that you could, that a girl, a female, when there's no male, could pass on the genealogy. This is complete nonsense. Sometimes they'll say the daughters of Slavchad. These are daughters from the tribe of Menashe. Their father died, no brothers. They wanted the property to stay in the tribe. So they're told explicitly that if you want to keep the property in your tribe, if you want to keep your father, perpetuate your father's memory, you had to marry a man in the same tribe. And if you do that, then the land will stay with your family. But if you don't, then it's gone, because it goes according to the father, not according to the girl. It's unbelievable to me that Christians actually use B'nai Slavchad. I don't know the anglicized, the daughters Zelachad, whatever, they massacre this word. But anyway, so it proves the opposite. Look at Numbers chapter 36 for yourself. They had to marry men who were from the same tribe in order to maintain the property in their family. What does that mean? That the girl can't convey it, only the boy can. But if she marries someone from her own tribe, then it can stay in. Well, of course, if a girl from Yehuda marries a boy from Yehuda, so then the children are from Yehuda. It's not a problem at all. Now let's go to Chronicles. The book of Chronicles begins with 9 chapters of genealogies. And I think this contributes to the reason why people don't study Chronicles, because they think, oh, yeah, long genealogy, but 9 chapters straight. But people don't study them. This is really a problem. And if you would know the jewels, the honey, the gold and diamonds in those genealogies, you would be drinking and eating every one, put in your mouth and licking it. It's like a chocolate so good that you don't even want to eat it too quickly because you want it to last as long as possible. So in those genealogies, there's some things that are very, very important. Okay. And now, here's one story that we're told in the book of Chronicles, in First Chronicles. This is what he's referring to, that missionaries try to use to prove that a woman could convey that the tribe identity. What happens? You have a woman who's from the house of David, and she marries an Egyptian, actually marries an Egyptian slave, which is a forbidden relationship. Because, by the way, today's Egyptians, the people who live in Egypt today, numbering nearly 90 million people, the largest Arab country in the world, these are not Egyptians, not biblical Egyptians. Does not apply to them. That area has been homogenized, and Egypt today is made up an Arab country. Okay, there was an ancient race of Egyptians. They have been lost because of the Assyrian because of the Assyrian approach to conquer and then homogenize beyond the scope of the show, so we'll leave it alone. So we don't mean Egyptians today. But you're not allowed to marry an Egyptian, cannot convert to the Jewish faith. That's what the Torah says. Not going to go into why, so on is beyond the scope, but that's the point. Now, what Christians say is, here you have a woman from the house of David, and she married an Egyptian. And then it lists, I believe, 14 generations from her, descendants from her. Now, the Christians say, you see here, all these children are legitimately from the house of David. They're Davidic. And therefore it proves that a woman can convey tribe identity. So I challenge you to show me anywhere where those descendants are anywhere called the house of David. It doesn't exist. But this is like a magic show. You're going here, look at my hand of holy cards. Meanwhile, I'm pulling a pigeon out of my pocket from this side. It's deflecting. Where does it say that those descendants are from the house of David? Nowhere. Where does it say that those descendants could ever legitimately sit on the house of David? Nowhere. It's a false dichotomy. It's a completely fatuous, bogus claim. So now the question becomes why the author of Chronicles was Ezra, who was a great prophet, a great tzaddik of blessed memory. So why did Ezra bother giving us all these generations of the descendants of this illicit relationship? A woman marrying an Egyptian. Why put it there? It's a warning. The warning is giving us all these generations warning, this is not a legitimate family.
I got it.
You can't marry into them. That means it's just the opposite. The reason we're told this story in Chronicles is warning. This is a radioactive family because it began in a way that was forbidden. You had a Jewish woman marry an Egyptian. That can't be. And therefore, these children are not legitimate children of the children of Israel as being Davidic. So it's just the opposite of what the Christians would say. Nowhere does it say in this chapter that their descendants are legitimately from the house of David. It lists them as descendants of her. But because this is a radioactive family, it's a problematic family because it began with a relationship that was forbidden according to Torah. So what they're doing is, it's called it's a logical fallacy. If A equals B, then C equals D. Nonsense. This is completely bogus. If A equals B, that has nothing to do with if C equals D.
Got it. Wow. I'll tell you what, that's something I've never heard before. I've heard the claim about the Chronicles, but I never... Oh, speaking of that, I was going to interrupt you, but I know better. The juicy tidbits, the jewels that are hidden in this, you can actually find at Rabbi's website, outreachjudaism.org. If you'll go there, not only will you find the 2-volume book set with the CDs that should have been attached to this book, but they're made as an extra resource. You're going to love it. If you got the books, you want the CDs. If you got the CDs, you got to buy the book. It just makes it more powerful that way. But fascinating facts hidden in the book of Chronicles, you can actually also order that. That's Rabbi Singer's work, and you can get it from outreachjudaism.org. You can also find it on Amazon. And if all of you people who already have all this stuff and you just want to support Rabbi Singer on the side, go to his website. There's donates. You can put a little note on there what you're giving, donating money for. You can always use it. He's got a congregation there that's growing and bills to follow. And most rabbis I know don't get paid to and get an income coming in. At least I don't know. Anyway, my point is, buy the books if you don't have them. Get the CDs if you don't have them. Go and find out all the other things, the debates you've got. Rabbi, do you have, or are you going to have available the debate in Houston a couple years back with Dr. Craig Evans? Are you going to have that?
It's on YouTube.
I know. Well, I mean, some people like to have a hard copy, the actual DVD.
We decided. The reason is very simple. The debates that we sold, we had to pay for a crew to film it.
Oh, right, got it.
But in the case of the debate with Dr. Craig Evans, really a very special man, Jim Long donated his time. He's a filmmaker, to film it. So there was no cost to us. We're not running a business here.
Yeah, sure.
So
sure.
there was no cost to producing it, and therefore we didn't want to prevent people who couldn't afford it to think. So the cost for our DVDs is only to fray the cost it was to produce it, but in that case, there was no cost.
And with that said, as we mention every week, if you cannot afford the CDs, you can download each one of these little audio modules from his website. If you got the book, if you're reading chapter 3 in his book, volume 1, whatever, go to his website, find the matching title that matches the title in the book, download that to your smartphone or to your desktop, and listen to it while you're actually reading the chapter. You're gonna listen to it, and he's going to tell you, look over here on this part of your page, and you're going to see it there. So it's going to be really amazing. Like I said, if you've never experienced the two together, you really should. You're really missing out. Rabbi, thank you so much. It's been a really loaded episode, and I really appreciate your time. It's late for you, late for me. We got a Hebrew class starting here in about 35 minutes. So shalom, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. And again, Rabbi, thank you so much for your time. You're such a sweet Rabbi, and we love you dearly. And viewers, we'll see you same time, same place next week, Hashem willing. Shalom, everyone.